to customers and you tell them what it is you're doing. Human resources. Now you've got an organization, you've got 20 people, 50, 100, 1,000 people. You've got to begin to organize those people and benefits and get them in and so on and so forth, train them. All these kinds of activities are the domain of the organizational building piece that the organization has to now do. And so that really becomes the primary focus of growth, which is why we say build. You're building the organization in order to scale what it is you're doing. What impact does that have back on all these other factors that we began our journey with? Well, now let's look back at the money. Very interesting. Our primary source of our money, in fact, all of our source of our money is coming from our customer. Wonderful. This is a great place to be. We're in a position of power, we're in a position of strength, but we might say to ourselves, we really need to be able to do this in 500 cities, and we need to be able to do it very quickly. Well, this might be a good time to consider getting some serious investors into the game. This also puts the investor in the right place. They're not a driving partner, they're a supporting partner. And capital, because all capital is doing for us is helping us amplify something, is actually what we need to be doing in the growth phase. We need to be amplifying what it is we're doing so we can do it more and replicate it across more customers. So this, in fact, from the capital point, finally, this is a time when thinking about investors is going to be a very smart thing to do. And in fact, what's interesting is the investors will come to you because they'll know that you're not making stuff up. You're not projecting things that you have no idea about. You can say, hey, look at what we're doing in the business. Here's what happens. Here's the inputs. Here's the outputs. Here's what we do. And so investors will actually come to the entity and want to participate in the process precisely because of what's been built in the ideation and valley of death stages. And so capital finally from a source other than the customer, from an investor, becomes a very, very appropriate thing to consider. Many businesses, many great businesses never do that. They never have to worry about that. And they might do the investor event, for example, going public, simply as a way to reward employees and get them liquidity and things like that. Because one of the things they've done across the board there is compensate people with stock, for example. So that kind of exit is not a core focus, but it's something that they might work towards for different reasons. What you notice here is the notion of an exit, which is very much part of this venture capital investment-driven thing, is simply not what the business is about. Because what are you exiting? You're building an entity that's going to grow and thrive in the world. So there's not a notion of an exit as a particular forced goal. Now, founders might choose to exit because they might be done. You might be tired of the business. You might want to move on to do something else. You might want to go and take your yacht and sail around the world. That's a different issue. And that now becomes also a possibility that you might consider after you get through this growth phase. But it's not the end of this bootstrapping process. Because even if you exit from the business is actually now its own entity and it's going on making its way in the world. Now, one of the other things, let's look at the bootstrapper line, the organizational line, the people line. This is actually a very appropriate time for relators, for example, in many cases, to begin to take the leadership role. Because you're doing so much work internally to put this organization together, relators are perfect at helping to do that. And so they might start taking a primary role in that. And the evangelist has to hand that baton off, which is hard for a lot of evangelists, to the relator, so the relator can actually do what they do best. On the product line, hey, guess what? We might want to patent certain things now. We're now on version 20. We've actually developed some really interesting intellectual property, and we have the resources to be able to patent things, and patents provide a certain amount of defensibility that we could actually defend in the marketplace. Perfect time to maybe do patenting. Not appropriate in the ideation phase, but a perfect thing to begin to focus on in the growth phase. Another thing on the product line that begins to happen is that as you're scaling out this product, you actually begin to start thinking about the demo for the next product. And so that begins, the seed of thought can begin at some point in this growth phase, is what is that next product? Not the incremental improvements of the original product, but what's the next thing that we're going to go do? The kinds of customers that we've gotten are different. In the early stage, we got sort of innovator customers, customers that were willing to work with us, even though we didn't have an organization, we didn't have proven technology or whatever it might be, but they were willing to work with us. Now the customers are becoming more pragmatic. They might be early adopters or pragmatist customers who we have to then message to and market to differently. Books like Crossing the Chasm are very appropriate to start to think about that customer line and how that begins to evolve in this stage. But the key duality that's really going on now is, as opposed to in the Valley of Death, which was with the customer and the maven and the evangelist, now it's with the organization itself and its systems and processes that have to get scaled and integrated. So this is really what is happening in the growth stage, is that the organization is now scaling out what it's doing and building out what it's doing and learn from the previous stages of the venture. Now, the story would be over if all we had to do was get to the nirvanic place of growth and simply scale what we do and off we go. And fact of the matter is that valleys of death are repeating themes in the life of every business, as valleys of death are repeating themes in our own lives. This is, by the way, why it is so crucial that an organization go through the first valley of death. Because what that valley of death teaches it is all the skills and tools and orientations that are necessary to then react and respond when the organization hits that next plateau from its core first product that really worked, and it has to go back in and start to innovate. Now, there's a wonderful study that Shell did. They were asking the question, how long do companies live? And they found that companies live to be about 40 years old on average, which, if you think about it, it seems like a pretty short time. Very few companies make it past their 100th birthday, like companies like Shell. And what they discovered, essentially, in a book that's now called The Living Company, is that the long-lived companies are bootstrap companies. The long-lived companies know how to go through the valley of death. And the long-lived companies have an organic metaphor about that the company itself is its own entity making its way in the world, rather than a vehicle for founders and its employees to make money. So, very interesting tie now between how the company was raised, essentially, and how it continues to make its way in the world. And why I'm so particularly passionate, not just about bootstrapping from the individual point of view, about founders creating these amazing things, these entities, but also because the more sustainable, self-sustaining entities we have in the world, these companies, the better the world is. And so regardless of whether they're big or small or medium-sized, that they know how to innovate, they know how to respond to change. That's really, really key.